Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our weekly webinar series that occurs here on our Facebook page every Friday at 12. Today we have with us Robb Kidd, who is the Conservation Program Manager at Sierra Club for the Vermont Chapter, and he's going to be talking about the transportation bill that's extremely relevant right now in the State House. Robb, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being able to talk about the transportation bill. Actually doing these live webinars is kind of a pleasant event because we're normally out there talking with people individually, one-on-one, and doing different group meetings. So at least we're still being able to communicate with the populace as a whole. And I want to introduce a term that we've been using within the advocacy world. We now have what's called democracy by Zoom. Because our legislative process is happening in Zoom meetings, so it's kind of a new world we're facing right now.
Yeah.
So
just speaking about the advocacy world, do you mind talking a little bit about what your work is at Sierra Club and just how you are the only person staffed in Vermont for them? So I just wanted to know if you could talk a little bit to us about your experience with that and your role.
I'll actually reference first off the Sierra Club for those who don't know who we are, or the nation's largest and oldest conservation-based organization. We originally formed in California, advocating around the access to the outdoors with John Muir. It was more of an outings club and evolved into protecting natural landscapes. And so we have, and then it basically came further east. There's chapters all throughout the country. We have over 4.3 million members and supporters right now. In Vermont, we have about 14,000 members and supporters. So those who contribute to us are very vital to us. But unlike a lot of other organizations, a lot of people look at Sierra Club as being a big green, but we're very dependent on our grassroots nature. Like in the chapter levels, there's a lot of volunteers. We have an executive committee that it's supposed to be 10 members. Right now, we're down to 9 because somebody else left. But we have all volunteer executive committee who makes the policy decisions and does a lot of the advocacy work that I'm working on, just because as a lone staff person, I can't be involved with everything out there. So volunteerism in the grassroots is a very key point of what the Sierra Club does. Now, for my program area as the staff person, we looked at it and reviewed different issues over the last few years to see where the Sierra Club in Vermont could put its biggest bang for our buck. Where can we make a difference on? And we looked at transportation issues. And basically, the reason why we chose to start working on transportation is because between 43 and 47% of our carbon emissions are coming from the transportation sector. So how are we going to address climate change here in Vermont if we don't address what we're doing on transportation? So we prioritize my campaign work to work on that, to look at that. How can we move forward? So some of my program areas has been focused on vehicle electrification and advancement of public transit, advancement of complete street policies, advancement of rail. There's a whole gamut of things that you can work on in transportation issues. So it's not just a one size fits all. There's all of the above got to be done to fix the world we're in.
Definitely. And I think this rolls perfectly into just you explaining everything that's going on in Vermont right now with the transportation bill that the Transportation Committee is currently fast tracking. So before I send it off to you, I just want to remind anyone, if you have questions or comments for Robb, please put them in the comment section below. And I'm really excited to hear what Robb has to say.
So you invited me to primarily talk about the transportation bill. So I want to give full credit to the Vermont House Transportation Committee. On March 13th, the Transportation Committee passed out what was known as the Transportation Bill, H.942. And it had a lot of really good measures in there to kind of invest in vehicle electrification, create a transportation demand management program, invest in the downtown development, and explore ways that we can address carbon emissions. But unfortunately, the COVID-19 crisis came about. The legislature shut down, and the state's finances dropped dramatically. Actually, the transportation budget dropped by $45 million shortfalls just for the fiscal year. So they've had to kind of review and revamp and look at things, how things can be evolved. Then at first, there was a lot of uncertainty. What was going to happen? How are we going to continue this? How are we going to vote? How the committee is going to meet? How are we going to respond to the needs of people who are taking public transit? So on the federal level, an act was passed called the CARES Act, which fortunately, I'm not exactly on top of the exact number, but over $20 million came to the state of Vermont to support our public transit and to make sure that the safety of the passengers and safety of the drivers were met. And one of the things that responded is all the transit agencies in Vermont started actually by going fare free and creating protective measures for the drivers and sanitation program. I think you guys had Chairman Kurt McCormick talk about some of these things a couple of weeks ago, so I'm not going to go into those details. But there's a lot of really good programs that they're trying to do and money that's going to help those particular programs. So the short end is the committee, then the House Transportation Committee has been meeting a couple times a week and doing it through Zoom meetings. And it's kind of really nice is you can actually access from the legislative website the video recordings on YouTube now. So if you missed the meeting, you can actually listen to it live or listen to it the next day. Yesterday I actually rode on my bike while watching it and listening to it. So you can actually do it from home, do it from wherever you are. So it actually gives you maybe a little bit more access to it. So what it comes down to, basically because of the lack of money and the lack of time for the Agency of Transportation has now to work on other issues, they proposed back to the Transportation Committee a brand new bill, what they called must pass. And they went through it and they presented to the committee, and then simultaneously some of the committee members created alternative language because they want to keep some of their priorities in this particular bill. So I'm just going to kind of reiterate the bill's number is H.942, and the way it's going to proceed is that already passed out of the House Transportation Committee and was reviewed by the House Appropriations Committee, and the whole House was going to vote on this. But now the committee is going to introduce what's known as a strike all amendment, where they're going to just take place of that whole bill with practically a brand new bill. So that the committee is going to finalize, I've been told, they're trying to finalize the document so the committee can vote on the final product today at 3:00. I was hoping to actually have the final words, but I'm going to do a quick little summary of the different components of the particular bill, so everybody sees the good work that the members of the committee have been trying to do and how to respond. So H.942, the transportation bill, basically covers all the funding of the Transportation Committee and all the different the Agency of Transportation, all the different projects related to transportation. Some of the good things actually in this particular bill, basically one of the things that's really important is, yes, they've had to cut some of the programs around electric vehicle incentives, but thanks to Representative Mike McCarthy from St. Albans, they've added some language giving the agency the flexibility to adapt to the crisis, but also kind of making sure that they consider our climate measures. The state of Vermont in 2016 passed a comprehensive energy plan, adopted a comprehensive energy plan to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And the committee has been working hard to do this. And so As a result, they've had to remove the electric vehicle incentive program, which is still going to be happening because there's still another $1 million of revenues, but they're going to need to kind of, hopefully, maybe if the federal government adds a new bill, gives extra revenues, or extra revenues come in a different source, the Agency of Transportation understands that the House Transportation Committee wanted the priority of these programs. So they've given this kind of the flexibility to make sure that we keep our eyes focused on the creating these incentives, and then also making sure that Vermonters are still employed. So that's one key area of the way they have changed that particular bill. Another, actually, one moment, I'm just trying to pull up my document. Another key area on that, actually, public transit. The original public transit bill section of the bill had $1.5 million distributed to public transit. One was going to go to a fare free transit program, and that was going to encourage that they explore how to go fare free transit. For everybody's reference, in Vermont, fare free, the transportation revenues from fares was about $2.2 million for Chittenden County, and for the rest of the state was about $500,000. So they were going to commit $500,000 to make sure that we explored the idea of fare free transit. But now, as a result of the COVID-19 crisis and the federal CARES money, they've been able to make sure that the Green Mountain Transit and all the other transit agencies are operating as fare free. But then also, we don't want to see that rapidly disappear. So more language in the committee will make sure that they kind of look at that. If it allows money to be spent, that they can continue having a fare-free transit program. So it just gives accessibility to the transit programs even more. Then also, in the current version, they now have $500,000 going to programs to increase the usage of public transit ridership. Last year, the Agency of Transportation, from the directive of the legislature, did a study on public transit, on how to increase public transit. And they created a huge report that they presented, and it gave up a whole list of suggestions of how the agency can continue promoting public transit in Vermont, such as fare-free transit was included, using transportation demand management programs, even increased marketing, newer technology, all the working with different partners to make sure that people were aware of transportation. So this money directly goes to working on that and marketing and promoting. There also was originally another $500,000 that was supposed to go to possibly purchasing electric buses, but because of the financial crisis, they are now able to continue that. But like what I said with electric vehicles, the same language about prioritizing our choices is included in that. So that's the way we can actually move forward with that, where these particular ideas are still out there on the table, and the Agency of Transportation has flexibility to move forward. Now, unfortunately, I actually referenced that the electric vehicle incentive program is basically being kept, but the program revenues are not being added to at this particular time. But there's some key programs a lot of people don't realize. If you go to the Drive Electric Vermont website, it has a tracker of the different incentives that are going on. And look onto that, because actually the latest information I've heard is, even though car sales are dropping because people aren't going out and buying cars, the greatest percentage of car buying right now is a much higher percentage is electric vehicles, because those who are really shopping for electric vehicle are going to buy one now even more. So it's a really good program to continue, but we don't have the particular money. Also, on the original proposal, there was also $750,000 that was supposed to go to electric vehicle charging infrastructure. That is not in the House Transportation Bill, but it's in another bill in the legislature called the Capital Bill, which is through bonding for infrastructure programs. So it is there, but it's not within the transportation bill. And a lot of people wonder why, like, electric vehicle charging, that actually just makes sure that the fear of people not be able to charge their vehicle, they can travel a further distance. They can go that extra mile and not have to worry about getting a charge on their vehicle. But still, with around charging, 90% of charging for electric vehicle takes place at a person's home. So it's just helping that fear being removed. Another really good point on this is there's a fund called the Downtown Development Fund. And I don't know the exact numbers, but I think it's been underfunded for the last number of years. And the committee wanted to make sure, compared to the governor's request, that they added an additional $100,000 still to this program. And I think that's a really important program to focus, because you see a lot of our downtowns are now going to be suffering because of the lack of economic activity. So if we can invest some money into the downtowns and develop programs that help people and help the communities, make better, friendlier, pedestrian and bicycle-friendly communities, other economic drivers that help downtowns, it could be a really good, important measure. Then one other kind of key point I want to actually reference is in the last transportation bill, there was a section called about transportation demand management. And this is how you would work with employers to reduce the demand of transportation, and working with employers to incentivize different programs. And the legislature worked really hard, thanks to Representative Rebecca White from down in Hartford, White River Junction. I'm not sure exactly which. I think White River Junction should represent, to look into creating a pilot program, how they would work with key larger employers to make sure people had access to alternative transportation measures and be kind of incentivized. Unfortunately, because of budgetary constraints, that program was kind of scrapped by the Agency of Transportation in their request, but the committee decided upon today about looking into kind of the idea of telecommuting. Now, with COVID-19, there are so many of us out there working from home. I'm working at home right now. My wife is working at home. My neighbors, all of them who still have employment, are able to do their work at home. So what they're going to do is kind of look into and study the impacts of telecommuting and look at how much it saved different employers, how much it's saved in our carbon emissions, how much is it saving in people's times, because a lot of Vermonters spend a lot more time trying to get to work and money and their income getting to work. But if a lot of these jobs where we don't need to be in a building all the time, it can be really helpful as a benefit for people to be able to work from home. So that's something really we should kind of move forward in looking into. And obviously, it works, telecommuting. And also, I'm going to give you a little plug for the Sustainable Transportation Group here, is I know you all were working on some type of survey about telecommuting, about people who've been doing that. So I don't know if you, Brianna, if you have information regarding that, but I think that's a really good thing we can think about in the upcoming future. Now, there was other talk in the particular legislation, but it didn't happen, about making sure that, that they're going to get extra revenues coming in, that maybe those projects where we're looking on paving roads and making the buffer zone and bike paths a little bit wider, maybe they should consider that to make sure that there's extra room for bicycles on the side of the road. And if it's going to cost a little bit more money, but we have federal money coming in to support something like that, I think that'd be something really good for us to proceed forward with. There's Another key component in this particular bill is funding towards the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail. For those who don't know that trail, it's currently operating in different points between Morrisville and Jeffersonville, and between Danville and St. Johnsbury. And there's different components where they're trying to connect to go all the way to St. Albans. And I think it's a 100-mile thing. And there's been a lot of micro businesses popping up alongside the trail, creating an economic activity, but it's actually encouraging biking opportunities. So there is some money in that particular bill to go towards that. I think it's $700,000 is the exact number. So there's actually some good movement on that is passing out of that. And then further, like another $2 million to the capital bill is for long-term infrastructure to support that particular program. There also is, for those in your area, so for those in your area in Burlington, there actually is some money and directive to the Amtrak station that they're hopefully going to be online by December 21. So that's going to actually be moving along that project, even though right now, currently, Amtrak is not operating in Vermont. It's going to be returned. So maybe we got to make sure we have the proper infrastructure for the return to these particular mechanisms. And that's going to be the key points of this group, Sustainable Transportation Vermont, about the transportation bill. There's a whole line of other things in there, like the central garage and maintenance programs that kind of actually, there's even a thing about a new thing called Portland cement, which actually is a much more environmentally friendly cement, but still, I'm not going to say it's our top priority, but it's something that can move the envelope around something. And there's a lot of other things that I am not going to go into talking about that. Now, I just see one question on the side here about somebody questioning about non-residential vehicle chargers are mainly financed to placate the EV owners. Actually, that's not. It actually will help those in a lot of rural communities, because the more electric vehicles out there, it will actually add extra money to the local economy. For every dollar you spend on gasoline, 85 cents of it, 85 cents leaves the state of Vermont. Comparatively, every dollar you spent on electricity in Vermont, about 65 cents stays within Vermont. So it's a helpful keeping money within the state. And actually, the more electricity we use, most electricity that's out there in the public sphere is for electric vehicle charging is done at night. So the more we can encourage vehicle electrification, it will actually cause the demand at the middle of the night to use excess energy. So then actually lower electricity rates, because the electric utilities were going to be able to bring in extra revenues that they weren't, basically on electricity that they weren't using. So this is basically supporting the electric vehicle infrastructure, helps get over those particular fear of range anxiety, helps make sure that other people who are coming and traveling within Vermont have access to charging. So it's helpful for the whole economy as a whole. So actually, I see Jack also threw in a question here about, do you think the state will work to keep transit free in beyond COVID? Actually, that was actually a big point of the discussion yesterday with the Transportation Committee, and this language that they indicated that it is a priority for them to move forward for free transit, and it's something that we need to go ahead with, and we'll look at continuing that program. But right now, the federal COVID-19 money is actually helping finance it, but we can look at it as a way to explore those particular issues and making sure that people have access and it's not a barrier to getting on the bus. I like this one. How do you think most legislators get to the state house? Do they carpool or bus? Well, during the legislative session, I think Montpelier's population goes up because a lot of the legislators during the session who live further away will rent apartments, will rent a hotel space. So a lot of them will stay here, but those who live in Chittenden County, they who don't live far enough away. I know uh, Kurt McCormick actually does take the bus himself. He's actually one of the few legislators that doesn't even own a car. Representative Mary Sullivan, she'll try to carpool and bus with people. There's a lot of others who do that in other parts of the state, will come up with other people from their delegation, maybe further up, but not all. There's a lot of things that I think they can improve upon, but I think a lot of them are mostly cognizant of that. Um, and and busing from other people, it's like it's not easy to get to Montpelier on a bus, and so we're going to have to maybe explore those particular options. And and Brianna, do you have something to ask me here?
Yeah, I was just going to talk a little bit about how Sustainable Transportation Vermont really values and thinks behavior change is something really important. But before that, Sustainable Transportation Vermont is also a huge supporter of TDM. And Richard Watts, who's the co-founder of Sustainable Transportation Vermont, was just asking me something about what was happening with TDM legislation.
So in the original House Transportation Bill, they had language in there for a pilot program on TDM. And the agency was agreed to the language in there, and they were going to go ahead with it. But now with COVID-19, they're basically came back and saying, we don't have the capacity to work on that particular idea. And they were going to totally recommend scrapping that in the administration's proposal. Representative Becca White, who was looking into that, was kind of, I want to say, probably disappointed that that program was disappearing. But instead, what they did is created this study on telecommuting. And that was what I mentioned earlier in the conversation that's now in the House Transportation Bill, that will look into the measures about how we can foster and support telecommuting at this juncture, because and the agency agreed to do that, and they'll agree to working with the Agency of Economic Development to create that report. And actually, for also reference, $50,000 they say it would cost to do that report, and they have the money in their budget basically on federal transportation research program, so it's not coming out of any fund that would support another program. So I hope I answered that question well enough, Richard. It's not full TDM, but it's a movement forward based on the time frame of COVID-19.
Okay, awesome. I'm sure Richard will comment back if he has any other questions. But speaking about COVID and how COVID has shifted so many people to working remotely and has kind of sparked some sort of behavior change, do you have any advice for people that are watching and want to start practicing more environmentally friendly practices in their lifestyle? Do you have any advice for that, and how do you yourself incorporate your beliefs into your everyday lifestyle?
Perfect. So actually myself, I live in Montpelier. I live a mile from the State House. And so I consciously have chose to live in a town where I can walk to work. I can't stand commuting. I actually grew up outside of New York City, and most of the friends I grew up with sit on a bus, train, drive in traffic, and take some hours to get to work. I want to enjoy all the time I have free, not working or not trying to get to work. So that's one of the things I purposely chose to do, is live within town, so I can walk to getting to work, and it saves me on that. And I myself even bike a lot, and I see a lot of people now even buying electric bikes, because you can actually go those extra additional miles, even if you're not in the best shape. You can go that 4 miles to middle of town and catch a bus if you need to. So that's one of the particular areas we can do. And I also think, this idea of telecommuting is really helpful. I was talking with some folks here in Montpelier who were trying to push parking, charging higher rates for parking in town. And yes, it would cause people not to park in town if it costs more. And I went and talked to some of my folks in the union and talked about, well, how would you guys feel about that? Your employees need to pay for parking. And they said, oh my God, we can't do that. And but if you help us by getting us to allow greater telecommuting, doing things like that, that'd be actually, we'd appreciate that. So I kind of look onto what's encouraged the telecommunicating portion. And then we can look at too, like what's making it more difficult to park. But once everybody's able to, they don't have a need to drive into town, or they're living close enough where they can walk to work, and we're doing the downtown development. We're doing those different things. That's where I see it evolving, and that we can do that. Like, even though I'm fortunate, before I even this happened, I would work at home 2 days a week anyway, even though I live so close to my office, or I'd work at half a day here and then walk to the office. And a lot of our jobs, we don't need to be at an office anymore. With the virtual technology, we can access that. But not everybody has that. So we got to consider that, not everybody has broadband access and strong enough broadband. And we have to kind of look on making sure that people do and have the proper technology to access that stuff. So it's not as simple where we can just flip the switch and everybody can take part in this.
Definitely, definitely. And I think COVID has totally changed people's mindsets on how they can help and change their lifestyle to help the environment. And I'm just wondering, looking forward, and how this bill addresses our priorities and how the state will address climate change. Does this work in any way relate to your work with the Transportation Climate Initiative? And if you could just describe your work with that as well, that would be great.
Oh, good. The Transportation Climate Initiative. I was hoping that would be brought up. For those who weren't aware of that, the Transportation Climate Initiative is a multi-state regional pact to basically put a cap and investment on transportation emissions in the whole Northeast. And, they were doing some modeling programs to look into how we can do that program. And they were supposed to give what they call their final MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, was supposed to be out in April. And basically all the states would say yes, no, or whether they're going to participate. We were really hoping for that because, as I've already stated, 47% of our climate emissions comes from transportation. I was hoping that, so we need to address that, but we need to take revenues and the profits from motor vehicle fuels and invest in other opportunities. Invest in bike share, invest in train, invest in alternative programs and carpooling services. And we don't have the money, we don't have the resources to do that. So that was kind of a really critical way to do that, is by getting dollars into the state that were leaving here in the first place. There were some estimates that saw we could have bring $10 million additional a year from implementing that program just as a start. And there's higher estimates that you can bring up to $45 million a year. So if we can bring money in there, but then use less gasoline, less oil, and Vermonters aren't paying their salaries to go to things like that, I think is a win for us. So I think it's all tied in together. Like, if we do a program like the Transportation Climate Initiative, we can fund the programs to transition away to a cleaner transportation system for all. So I told you it was going to happen April. They officially announced that in November is when the final memorandum of understanding, because the economy has changed dramatically. So they got to relook at the numbers and reassess it. And we're hoping that maybe we can still proceed forward. And for those who are having some fears around gasoline and additional costs on gasoline, it's something that we have to kind of maybe address to make sure that those who are more vulnerable to paying higher prices at the pump are helped in the process. So these programs aren't just going to help those wealthy individuals who can afford an electric vehicle right now. These proceeds got to go helping people who aren't being able to pay into programs.
Definitely. Well, thank you. And I think that was my last question. One thing that I guess I have one more question. How can individuals show their support or concern for this bill? Like, for an example, how TDM has kind of been scrapped. How can individuals kind of show the Transportation Committee in these last couple? You said that it was going to come out at 3, the final decision, correct?
Yeah, so the final bill should be coming out sometime or close to it. Should be coming out. I was told it was possibly going to be out by lunchtime, and I don't see the latest version yet. But with the legislative process, I want everybody to realize is the legislators are human, even those that you may not necessarily agree with, and they put a lot of time and effort into it. I mean, and to learn and to get an understanding of all these particular issues, it takes a lot of work. So I always encourage people to give gratitude for those, even if it's not the perfect bill. Like, Representative Mike McCarthy worked really hard to get this particular language to still allow to consider our climate priorities. And a communication I had with him, he's kind of like frustrated that they actually had to simultaneously gut the funding towards electric vehicle incentives. Becca, I told you about Becca White, worked really hard to get the TDM legislation and now has to bring it down to just this program. It's kind of, they're trying to make do with the best of the situation. They're trying to move forward with all these policy ideas and what makes sense for our future. So the best thing I would say to do is everybody to contact their individual legislator and say, thank you for your time. And I'd love to talk to you more or to give you some insights because these are my priorities and this is the way I think about it. Instead of just saying, you didn't do enough.
Yep, totally.
I mean, I do that too as well. You used to see some of my comments I've made about some of the legislators. I told them, so I do that at times as well. But doing the thank you goes a long way for them.
Definitely. Okay, well, I think that was my last question. Do you have anything else you'd like to say or anything?
No, thank you very much. Thank you for the work you all are doing, Richard and Jack and Rihanna. I appreciate being able to come on to here and people listening. It's kind of, I like to talk if you haven't noticed that yet. So not being able to be out on the street talking with people, it's kind of a challenge. So, so I appreciate the time.
Okay, well, thank you. And we hope to have you back here and to hear more and definitely keep us updated with what's going on in the bill and everything.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep. So now I'm just going to announce our speaker for next week, as well as I just want to make a quick announcement about our YouTube channel. So we recently just created a YouTube channel that will have all of our videos from the past of this series that are posted, and we'll post all the new ones as well. So if you know anyone that struggled to access these videos through Facebook, now they can use them on YouTube. We still haven't figured out really how to broadcast them live on YouTube, so they'll be able to access probably a day later so Saturdays usually is when they'll be available. But this is the page, and in the comment section I added the link to the YouTube channel, so feel free to subscribe and like and post your comments, and we would really appreciate your feedback on everything. So thank you all for joining us, and next week, definitely tune in. Next week, we are going to have, Kelly Stoddard-Pohl, who's the director of the AARP Livable Community Initiative, and she's going to talk a little bit about how to make downtowns work. So tune in next Friday, May 29th at 12. And thank you everyone for being here.